A palm slapped hard against the glass display case. Coins scattered across the counter and rolled onto the floor. An old woman's hand shook as she reached to gather them. She dropped to one knee, chasing a nickel under the counter, whispering that she was sorry. The clerk rolled her eyes and told her to hurry up. Behind them, the door swung open and a shadow filled it. Heavy boots, a worn leather vest, a gray beard and thick scarred hands. His name was Dutch Kowalski, and he had ridden with the Hells Angels for 40 years. He stopped cold when he heard what the woman was asking for. A damaged cake. A day-old cake. Anything they were throwing away. It was her granddaughter's birthday, and she had counted out every coin she owned. What Dutch did next froze that whole bakery in silence. Stay with me on this one. Now let me back up a few minutes because you need to see how this started. It was a Tuesday morning in Redding, California. Hot already, the kind of dry heat that comes off the pavement before 9. Dutch had pulled his Harley into a slanted parking spot outside a little bakery on the edge of town. Sweet Alma's, the sign said, faded gold letters on glass. He wasn't there for cake. He was there because his saddlebag strap had come loose 40 miles back, and this was the first shaded curb he'd found where he could tighten it down without cooking his hands on the chrome. Down by the curb sat an old hound named Diesel. Gray around the muzzle, one ear that never stood all the way up, hips that didn't work like they used to. Diesel had ridden more miles in that sidecar than most people drive in a lifetime. He didn't bark. He just watched the door of the bakery with those patient brown eyes, the way old dogs do, like he already knew something the rest of us didn't. Now Dutch was a big man, not Jim Big, working big. The kind of thick through the chest and shoulders you only get from decades of hard labor and harder living. His hands were scarred. His nose had been broken more than once. He had a beard gone mostly silver and a face that made people cross the street. And here's the thing about a man like that. People look at the leather and the patches and the size of him, and they decide the whole story before he says a single word. They see trouble. They see somebody to be afraid of. They never once think he might be the softest heart in the building. So he's kneeling by his bike, working that strap, when the little bell over the bakery door rings. And out of the corner of his eye, he sees her go in. A small woman, maybe 75, maybe 80, a thin cardigan even in the heat, a purse held with both hands against her stomach, the way you hold something when it's the only thing you've got left. She walked slow, careful, like every step cost her a little. Dutch didn't think much of it. Just an old lady going for bread. He went back to the strap, but the door hadn't shut all the way. And in the quiet of that morning, with no traffic and the engine ticking as it cooled, he could hear every word that passed inside. He heard her ask the young woman behind the counter a question, and her voice, when she asked it, was so small and so ashamed that it stopped Dutch's hands right where they were. "Excuse me, dear," Ruth said. "I was wondering, do you ever have cakes that get damaged, ones you can't sell, maybe a little crushed or from yesterday?" The clerk, a girl no older than 20, barely looked up from her phone. "We throw those out." "Yes, of course, I understand." Ruth's fingers moved on the clasp of her purse. "It's just my granddaughter turns 8 today, and I wanted to get her something, anything at all. I don't have very much, but I could pay a little for one you were going to throw away." Now, I want you to sit with that for a second. This woman wasn't asking for a handout. She was asking to buy the garbage. She was asking to pay for the thing headed to the dumpster because that was all her pride and her wallet could stretch to. And she said it in front of a room full of strangers because it was her granddaughter's birthday and she couldn't stand the thought of showing up with nothing. You know how much it costs a proud woman to say a sentence like that out loud? It costs everything she's got. The clerk sighed, loud enough to make a point. "Ma'am, we can't sell you a damaged product. It's a liability thing. If you want a cake, the cakes are $22. She pointed a lazy finger at the case. That's what we've got." Dutch was on his feet by now, standing just outside the open door. Ruth looked down into her purse. And you could see her doing the math. You could see her fingers counting, moving the coins around, hoping the number would change if she counted twice. It didn't. It never does. She had a few crumpled dollars and a handful of change, and she'd known it before she walked in, but hope is a stubborn thing in a grandmother's heart. "I see," she said finally. "I'm sorry to have bothered you. Thank you for your time." And that's when her hand shook and the purse tilted and the coins spilled out across the counter and onto the floor. That's the sound you heard at the very start. That slap of a palm on glass as she tried to catch them, the nickels rolling, the old knees dropping to chase them across the tile. The clerk didn't come around to help. She just stood there, arms crossed, and said, "Can you hurry, please? There's a line." There was no line. There was one old woman on her knees and one old dog watching through the glass, and a Hell's Angel standing in the doorway with a look on his face you would not want pointed at you. Ruth got the last coin. She stood up slow, holding the counter for balance, her cheeks red, her eyes wet, and she turned to leave with nothing. That was the moment. She had done the bravest thing a proud person can do, which is ask for help out loud, and she had been laughed at for it. Now she just wanted to disappear. She took one step toward the door, and that's when the big shadow in the doorway didn't move to let her by. Dutch stepped inside instead. The little bell rang again. He was so big he had to duck his head under the frame, and when he straightened up in that small, bright bakery, the whole room seemed to shrink around him. The clerk's eyes went wide. Her arms came uncrossed real fast. Ruth flinched back, pressing herself against the counter, clutching that purse, because she saw what everybody sees: the leather, the size, the scars. She thought, here comes trouble on top of everything else. Dutch looked down at her. And when he spoke, his voice was low and rough, but it was gentle. The kind of gentle that surprises you coming out of a man that size. "Ma'am," he said, "you dropped this." He held out one thick hand. In his palm was a single quarter, one she'd missed, rolled all the way to the door. He set it in her hand and closed her fingers around it, careful, like it was made of glass. "Oh," Ruth said, "thank you." She didn't know what else to say. Nobody in that room did. Then Dutch turned to the counter. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "That one there," he said, and he pointed to the case. Not to the crushed one in the back, to the front row, the big one. 3 layers, white frosting, sugar roses, the fanciest cake in the whole place. "The best one you've got, box it up." The clerk blinked. "Sir, that's our premium tier, that's $45. "I didn't ask what it cost," Dutch said. "I asked you to box it up." She started moving, fast now. Ruth was staring up at him, her mouth open a little, one hand still closed tight around that quarter. "Sir, I can't let you. I couldn't possibly. You don't even know me." Dutch pulled a worn leather wallet out of his back pocket. He looked at her, and something in his face softened all the way down. "What's her name?" he asked. "The birthday girl." Ruth's voice caught. "Lily, her name is Lily." "Lily?" Dutch nodded slow, like he was filing it away somewhere important. 8 years old today. "Yes." He turned back to the clerk who was tying the box shut with string. "You got any of those little candles? The number kind. Get me an 8, and a card, a birthday card, whatever you've got." The girl scrambled. She was a different person now. Funny how that works. Nothing changes a rude heart faster than watching a bigger will walk through the door. Ruth reached out and touched Dutch's forearm, right on a tattoo faded blue with age. Her hand was so small against it. "Why?" she asked. And she wasn't being difficult. She genuinely didn't understand. In her whole hard month, nobody had done a single kind thing, and now this. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Dutch was quiet for a second. Diesel had gotten up outside and pressed his gray nose to the glass, watching his old man. "Because somebody should have," Dutch said. "That's all, because somebody should have and nobody did. He paid. He told the girl to keep the change, and the change was more than the cake." Then he picked up the box himself, held it flat and level in one big hand like he was carrying a newborn, and he held the door for Ruth with the other. Outside, in the warm morning, Ruth kept saying thank you over and over until Dutch gently told her she could stop now. Diesel sniffed her cardigan and leaned his old weight against her leg, and for the first time all day, Ruth smiled. She scratched the dog behind his one crooked ear. Dutch set the cake box carefully into a paper bag with handles so she could carry it, and he told her to hold it flat, and she promised she would. She started off down the sidewalk toward home, walking a little lighter than before, the box held out in front of her like a treasure. Dutch watched her go. He swung a leg over his Harley. A good deed done. Simple as that. Time to ride on, that's what he thought. That's what you'd think too. But it wasn't over. It was barely even started. Because Dutch, sitting there letting his engine warm, watched Ruth stop at the corner. And he watched a man in a gray suit step out of a parked county sedan and walk right up to her. And he watched that man hand her a folded yellow paper. And he watched Ruth's shoulders fall all the way down, and the bag with the cake in it start to tip in her hand until Dutch was off his bike and moving before he even knew he was doing it. He got there in time to catch the cake. He did not get there in time to catch the news. The man in the suit was already walking back to his car. Ruth stood on the corner holding a yellow paper in one hand and Dutch's cake in the other. And she was reading it again and again, like the words might rearrange themselves into something she could survive. "Ma'am," Dutch said, "what is that?" She didn't answer right away. She just handed it to him because she didn't have the strength to say it out loud. It was a notice, final notice. She had until Friday. That was 3 days. The little house she'd lived in for 51 years, the house where she'd buried a husband and raised a daughter and was now raising that daughter's child, was being taken. Back taxes and a reverse mortgage that had gone wrong on her in ways she never fully understood. Signed by a man who probably never saw her face. "Friday," Ruth whispered. "They're taking it Friday. And when they take the house, they take Lily. There's a woman from the county. She says a child can't live in a car with an old lady. She says Lily has to go into the system." Ruth's voice broke clean in half. "Today's her birthday. She's turning 8 and I bought her a cake with a stranger's money, and by Friday I won't even be able to keep her." Now hold on, because right here is where this stops being a story about a cake. An hour ago, this was one kind man buying one small kindness. Now it's an 80-year-old widow about to lose her home and her granddaughter to a machine that doesn't have a face to look at or a heart to reach. That's not something you fix with $45. That's not something you fix with a good deed and a wave goodbye. That's the kind of trouble that swallows people whole and never even burps. Dutch stood on that corner and read the yellow paper twice. Then he folded it in half, slow and deliberate, and he put it in his vest pocket like he was taking possession of it. And listen, before I tell you what this old biker did next, do me one favor. If you're the kind of person who believes the world still has a few good people left in it, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what Dutch Kowalski was about to do over the next 3 days is exactly the kind of story that gets buried and forgotten, and I want to keep telling them. Stay with me. Dutch handed Ruth back the paper. "Where's Lily right now?" "Home. My neighbor is watching her. She thinks I went to buy bread." Ruth wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "I don't want her to see me cry. Not today." "Then she won't," Dutch said. "Not today, get in." He didn't have a car. He had a Harley and a sidecar with an old hound in it. But he lifted Diesel out, and that dog stood patient on the sidewalk while Dutch settled Ruth into the sidecar like she was royalty and set the cake in her lap. Diesel he tucked in behind, half in her lap, half on the little shelf, and the three of them rode slow through the streets of Reading, an old biker, an old widow, and an old dog, carrying a birthday cake through town like the most important delivery in the world. Ruth's house was small and blue and needed paint. The porch sagged. But somebody had put a strip of pink streamers over the door, cheap ones, and a hand-drawn sign in a child's letters that said Happy Birthday to me. Lily had made her own decorations. That's the kind of detail that'll take the legs right out from under you. Dutch parked. Before Ruth got out, he put a hand on her arm. "I need you to listen to me now," he said. "You go in there. You put on the best face you've got. You give that little girl the birthday of her life. You let her blow out that candle and eat that cake and believe today is a good day, because it is. You understand me? Today is a good day." "But Friday..." "Friday's my problem now," Dutch said. "Not yours, you gave me the paper. That means it's mine. You just go be her grandmother today." Ruth looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded and something came back into her spine that had been gone all morning. She went inside. Dutch heard the shriek of an 8-year-old seeing a 3-layer cake with sugar roses. He heard, "Grandma, is that for me? Is that really for me?" He heard laughing. And he sat on his bike at the curb with Diesel's chin on his knee, and he pulled out an old flip phone and he started making calls. Now here's the thing you have to understand about the Hells Angels, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you they're all saints, because they're not, and neither is anybody else. But there is a thing in that world about family, and about the ones who can't fight for themselves, that runs deeper than most people would ever guess. Blood in, blood out, people say, and they mean the bad parts. But there's a good part too, and the good part is that when one of theirs draws a line and says this person is under my protection, the whole club moves. And when Dutch Kowalski started calling around that afternoon, he wasn't calling for a fight. He was calling for a widow. First call was to a brother named Preacher, who wasn't a preacher at all but had done 2 years of law school before life took him another direction. Dutch read him the yellow paper, every line, every number, slow enough for Preacher to write it all down. Preacher went quiet for a long moment, and Dutch could hear him tapping a pen against something, and then he said one word: predatory. He said the reverse mortgage terms on that house were the kind of thing that had gotten whole companies sued into the ground, and that a county rushing an eviction on an 80-year-old caretaker with a minor in the home in 3 days was cutting corners so sharp somebody was going to bleed. Somebody wanted that house cheap, Dutch. This ain't paperwork. This is a wolf in a suit. Don't let them touch it Friday. Buy me 48 hours and I'll make some calls to people who owe me. Second call was to a woman named Sandra, a retired social worker who'd patched up more than one biker's family over the years and owed exactly nobody any favors, but gave them anyway. Dutch told her about Lily, about the party going on right now behind that blue door, about the county woman and the word system. Sandra didn't say anything for a second, and then her voice went cold and hard, the way a good person's voice goes when they've seen this exact cruelty 100 times before. A kinship placement with a grandmother is the first thing the law is supposed to protect, not the first thing they tear apart. You don't tear a child off the one person left who loves her and call it safety. Somebody's being lazy. Somebody wants an easy file and a closed case by Friday. Give me the caseworker's name off that paper. I still know every supervisor in that office, and I will be a problem for all of them by morning. Third call went out to the club, just a few words. A grandmother in trouble, a little girl about to be taken, a house going Friday, who's around. That's all Dutch said, because with those men that's all it ever takes, and here's where it turns. Because by that evening, Dutch's phone would not stop buzzing, and the buzzing didn't stop for 3 days. It wasn't just his charter. It was riders from 3 counties. It was a bar owner who set up a fund and put a jar on the counter with Ruth's name on it. It was a contractor who said the porch and the paint were on him. No argument. It was a woman who ran a diner and said the birthday girl and her grandmother ate free from now on. Don't you dare try to pay. It was a welder, a mechanic, a retired nurse, a man who just gotten out and had $40 to his name and gave 20 of it. It was more money than the back taxes, raised by rough men and women with tattoos and records in a single afternoon for an old lady none of them had ever met. Dutch didn't tell Ruth any of it that day. He let her have the party. He sat outside on the porch step with Diesel while the sun went down, and at one point the door opened and a small girl in a paper crown came out and looked at him. Lily, missing a front tooth, frosting on her chin. "Are you the man who bought my cake?" she asked. "I helped a little," Dutch said. She studied him, the leather, the beard, the size of him. And then she did the thing nobody expects. She walked right up and hugged his arm, the same arm her grandmother had touched in the bakery, and she said, "It's the best cake anybody ever had in the whole world." Dutch, 40 years a Hell's Angel, a man who'd seen and done things he'd never speak of, had to look away down the street for a second so the little girl wouldn't see his eyes. "Yeah," he said rough, "it sure is." Friday came. And this is the part I want to tell you slow, because this is what it was all for. The county sedan showed up at 9. Same man in the gray suit, and behind him, a locksmith and a sheriff's deputy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on God's earth. And parked along that whole quiet street on both sides, nose to tail as far as you could see, were motorcycles. 60 of them, maybe more. Chrome catching the morning sun the whole length of the block, and standing on the sagging porch of that little blue house, which now had fresh paint and a porch that didn't sag anymore because a contractor and 2 other men had worked 2 nights straight under work lights, stood Dutch Kowalski with his arms crossed and Diesel at his boots. The man in the suit stopped on the sidewalk. He looked at the bikes. He looked at the men and women standing quiet beside them, not shouting, not threatening, just standing there. He looked at Dutch. "Sir," he said, "this is a lawful eviction. I have to ask you to step aside." "You can ask," Dutch said. That's when a small woman in a sharp blazer came walking up the sidewalk with a briefcase, cutting right past the county man like he wasn't there. Sandra. Behind her, a younger fellow in a bad tie, holding a phone with somebody important already on the line. Preacher's contact. Sandra didn't shout. She never once raised her voice. She just started talking, calm and fast, and every sentence landed like a brick dropped from a roof. The back taxes had been paid in full at 8 that morning, receipt in hand, so there was no tax basis for the sale, none at all. The reverse mortgage was under review for predatory terms, and a legal aid attorney had filed for an emergency stay 1 hour ago, and here was the case number, written down. Would you like to copy it? The removal of a minor from a kinship caregiver had been flagged for review by the state that very morning, and the caseworker who'd threatened to take Lily was now the one with questions to answer to her own supervisor. "So," Sandra finished, snapping the briefcase shut, "unless you'd like to be the man who forced an 80-year-old woman and an 8-year-old child out of a legally protected home, in front of all these witnesses, on a sale that no longer has any standing in the eyes of the law, I'd suggest you make a phone call before you touch that door." The man in the gray suit made a phone call. He walked off to the corner and talked low for a long time, one hand cupped over the phone, glancing back at the wall of chrome the whole while. When he came back, he didn't look at anybody. He just said the sale was postponed pending review, gathered up his locksmith, and left. The deputy tipped his hat to Ruth, who was watching from the window, and he almost smiled, and then he left too. And that street full of bikers did not cheer. They didn't roar their engines. Dutch had told them not to, because there was a little girl inside and this was her home, not a party. They just stood there quiet, and one by one they nodded to Ruth in the window and got on their bikes and rode off slow so as not to wake anything up. Ruth came out onto the porch when they were gone. She was shaking again, but not the same way. Dutch stood there with his hat in his hands like a much younger man. "It's not over, he told her honest. "There's paperwork, there's a hearing. Sandra and Preacher, they'll walk you through all of it and they'll be there every step, I promise you that. But they can't take the house, Ruth. Not now. And they can't take Lily. Not ever. You've got people now. A whole lot of them." Ruth couldn't speak. She just put both her small hands over her mouth and cried, and this time Dutch let her, because these were the other kind of tears, the kind a person has to let all the way out. Then she said, "How do I ever pay this back? Any of it? I don't have anything." And Dutch said the thing that this whole story was leading to. The promise. He'd made it to himself back in that bakery, and now he made it out loud. "You don't pay it back," he said. "You never think about paying it back. But I'm going to ask you for one thing." He looked at the front door, where Lily was peeking out, paper crown still on 3 days later because she refused to take it off. "Every year on that little girl's birthday, I'm going to show up at this house with the biggest, prettiest cake in the whole city of Reading. Front row of the case. Every single year. I don't care if I'm 80 myself. I don't care if I have to ride here in a wheelchair. As long as I'm breathing, Lily has a cake, and she has it from the best bakery in town, and nobody—" His voice caught, and he pushed through it. "Nobody ever throws her a scrap again." Ruth reached up, and Dutch bent down, and this tiny widow wrapped her arms around the neck of this enormous outlaw, and neither one of them cared what anybody thought about how that looked. Now let me tell you how it went after that, because I know you want to know. The hearing came 6 weeks later. Preacher's legal aid attorney tore the reverse mortgage apart in front of a judge who did not appreciate what had been done to an elderly woman on a fixed income. The sale was voided. The predatory terms were stripped out and refinanced into something Ruth could actually afford, and the fund the bikers had raised covered it with money left over. Sandra made sure that money went into an account for Lily's future, college someday, and nobody could touch it but the two of them. The caseworker who'd threatened to take Lily was moved to a desk where she couldn't threaten anybody. And a supervisor personally apologized to Ruth, which doesn't undo a thing, but Ruth accepted it graciously, because that's the kind of woman she was. The little blue house stayed blue, but it got a new roof that fall, courtesy of a roofer named Tank who showed up one Saturday with 3 guys and didn't ask permission. Diesel started coming by so often that Ruth kept a bag of his food in her kitchen, and that old hound would sleep on the newly painted porch in the sun like he'd finally found the spot he'd been riding 40 years to reach. And every year on Lily's birthday, a Harley pulled up to that curb, and a big man with a gray beard, a little grayer each time, carried a 3-layer cake with sugar roses up the walk, held flat and level in one scarred hand like a newborn. Front row of the case. The best one they had, every single year just like he promised. He made it to her 13th birthday. That was the last cake he carried up that walk himself. When Dutch passed, it wasn't violent and it wasn't lonely. It was in a bed, with Ruth holding one hand and a teenage Lily holding the other, in the little blue house, because by then he was family and there was nowhere else he'd have wanted to be. Lily is grown now, and on her birthday every year, a Harley still pulls up to that curb because the brothers made a promise too, and outlaws keep their word better than most. A different rider each time. Always the biggest, prettiest cake in the city of Reading. front row of the case. Diesel is buried in the backyard under a stone that just says "good dog," because what else do you need to say? So the next time you see a rough-looking man in leather, a man the whole street decides to be afraid of before he said a word, I want you to remember an old widow on her knees chasing coins across a bakery floor. Remember who stepped through that door. Not to take anything, to give. Because somebody should have. And this time, somebody did.